using that as a transition, Brendan, do you want to just go ahead and reveal to us how you feel about Coogler's latest? Are you a sinner? Are you one of those beloved sinners that have
I'm a,
joined the movement?
I'm a sinner. I went for this one. I absolutely went for this one. In fact, if we go back just a few months, and when I say a few months, I really mean the beginning of 2025 when we did our most anticipated of 2025. I had Sinners somewhere in my top 5. And primarily because I saw it as a movie that could potentially be not just a cultural movement, but one of those examples of Hollywood getting back into their roots of classic Hollywood filmmaking for big movies that still didn't quite have, let's say, the Disney budgets to them, if that
Sure.
makes sense.
Uh-huh.
And it seems like that is happening. And I don't say that to toot my own horn. I say that as a celebration. I'm glad to see a movie like this that's not based on an existing property do well, even if it is pulling from familiar lore. And that just simply being vampire lore. But I definitely went for this movie. And I like the genre meshing of it, which is what most people seem to be talking about. It's actually not a perfect movie. It's kind of a mess in some ways. And it kind of reminds me a little bit of when Quentin Tarantino made movies like Django Unchained or The Hateful Eight, where he was basically making a classic Western slash character study slash thriller that would then give into almost grindhouse movie tendencies to climax themselves. And Sinners kind of does that, but I have to give Coogler some credit for at least finding more of a synergy in blending those genres together. And I think he does a really good job with that, kind of finding more of a thematic synergy and tying the vampire genre into a movie that really has no business being a vampire movie at all.
Mm.
So I found that really interesting. If anything, I'll probably conclude my opening thoughts here before we have more of a conversation on this. What I really hope more people start talking about is how this is first and foremost a music movie, a blues music movie specifically, which we don't really see that often. We see a lot of movies about various musical genres or even musicals, as we'll, talk about in the back half of this episode with a movie like Oliver winning Best Picture in 1968, straight up musical, right? But we don't really see many movies about the essence of blues music, which is such in many ways, maybe the most influential form of music ever. And this movie is absolutely that. And I was already on board with this movie, but when it gets towards its final scenes, not even the first, the final 5 minutes specifically, the musician in me kind of wept. Like, I
Mm.
really, really went for this thing. And I think as a celebration of that musical movement specifically and how I guess just how revolutionary that it was, how much of a reflection of the times it was,
Yeah.
how soulful it was, and how it basically brings even modern musical contexts together. That's the thing that I responded to. And
Mm.
I really hope people latch onto that side of it as well, outside of just the genre meshing that's going on here, because all that stuff is fun. All that stuff is great. But I think as a music movie, this has a lot to offer. And I think musicians especially will be very pleased by this. So I think it's quite good. And I was very happy with it.
Yeah. I am deeply, deeply excited to get further into this when we talk about it in the review that should be coming out perhaps tomorrow as this episode is released to everybody.
Hmm.
And I don't know how to say this without sounding hyperbolic because it is April after all. I don't see a world where this is not in my top 10, maybe not even in my top 5. I think this is honestly one of the best films of the decade so far. And
Okay,
there's a
you're
scene
there.
in this film that is up there as far as the best scenes of the decade so far. I love this film wholeheartedly. I think Sinners is, well, it's weird. It because it is kind of a messy movie,
Oh
but
yeah.
I love that it's messy and its ambition and the way it blends genres as you're talking about, Brendan. It is so masterful. It is thematically dense and extremely rich. The characters are utterly fascinating. So it's on one hand, I want to call it a masterpiece, but it's also one of the messiest masterpieces I've ever
Well,
seen.
that's an interesting
And that's what
point.
makes it so great.
Well,
To me, that's
yeah.
what makes it so phenomenal and one of a kind. And again, just one of the more captivating I've seen in the last 5 years.
Do you remember like 5 years ago or so, especially pre-COVID, when we saw a movie like this that was trying to blend genres and maybe wasn't as smooth with it, we would have been a bit harder on it, right? But I guess maybe given the landscape of Hollywood now that seems to be more risk averse, we tend to be a bit more accepting of movies that take those risks, maybe stumble on those ambitions or that fusing of different genres. But at least now it's great to see a movie that's trying something, right?
Yeah.
And I will say this, as messy as this movie is, and I know I compared it to Tarantino when he sort of divulged more into his genre filmmaking experiments. At least here, Ryan Coogler is able to find some type of thematic synergy with all of these different genre meshings. Everything here ties back to these centralized ideas on basically the essence of evil kind of formulating itself into all of these different things, and tying it to it,
Yeah.
through a historical lens, I think is very captivating. So there's at least a thematic synergy going on here, which I think is very effective about the
Yeah.
movie. So I at least give him credit for that. But yeah, I
Mm.
just as a music movie, that's the thing that really affected me most about it as a music movie. I think as a movie about the celebration of blues music, and I don't want to give away certain things that happen in the final 5 minutes. I mean, first off, if you've seen that trailer, the final trailer for this, I'm so sorry because it does give away too much, and that's unfortunate.
Mm.
But thankfully, it doesn't give away certain revelations, I'll say, as a music lover. There's a particular person that shows up in the final few minutes of this movie that I did not expect to see in a movie like this. And when that happened, I was kind of floored. And then that person's name showed up in the end credits, and I realized exactly what this movie is. Basically acting as a celebration of the influence of Black music and how that has shifted and formulated and manipulated through time, which is so evident in that sequence you're talking about, that one take sequence that everyone is talking about, which is basically a
Mm.
celebration of past, present, and future Black music. And I love that sequence so much. But yeah, there's a particular thing that happens in the end that just completely moved me, and I was kind of blown away by it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is the brilliance of this film. And again, why I go back to how masterful it is and why execution matters. And because from
Mhm.
scene to scene, it is a masterclass in filmmaking. Even if on the whole there are these gaps, again, it is a little bit of a messy movie,
Mhm.
but everything on a technical level, on a thematic level, it is extremely dense, extremely rich, and that comes through in the music. I agree with you. This is a celebration of Black music, specifically the blues, as you mentioned. And the music here is extraordinary,
Yeah,
utterly sublime. I
I
have
agree.
not stopped listening to the music here. On the whole, I know everyone is talking about the barn sequence, but the score throughout, what Ludwig Göransson does here is mind blowing, utterly,
Mhm.
utterly mind blowing all the way through the soundtrack. Even the music that is utilized here outside of the score is fantastic, and maybe we can talk about that as well. But
Mhm.
then the way it culminates and crystallizes in that barn sequence, which, as I noted, I think is honestly one of the best scenes of the decade so far. I do, again, at the risk of sounding hyperbolic, but I do not care. I am just on a high right now, and I'm going to ride the wave. I don't know how there's going to be another scene that tops this when we get to the
What
end
do
of
you
the year.
call that sequence? A moment of magical realism,
It
I
is
guess?
it is
Yeah.
like a moment of magical realism. It's this surrealistic dreamscape that
Yeah.
fuses the past, present, and future generations of music combined into this one moment to tell the history of black music and how one has informed the other along the way.
Yeah.
It is extraordinary. It is so stunning. And in the hands of anyone else, I don't know if it works. But Coogler and Goranson absolutely nailed it. They
You know what it
absolutely
is?
nailed it.
It's because it's soulful. Yeah, and
Very
that's
soulful.
it's soulful, and that's what this music is all about. What this movie is trying to suggest that this movie was all about was that it was speaking from the soul, was that it came from a
Yeah.
personal place, and sometimes those personal places can be very messy, and that's at least what I took from it. And as someone like myself that is a musician that does gravitate towards a lot of that music, I like seeing a movie that tackles the kind of the essence or at least the beginning of where that music stemmed from. I mean, this is the 1930s, and in many ways, blues music was the essence of most musical genres that we listen to today, whether it be rock and roll, whether it be hip hop, whether it be just straight up R&B or jazz.
Yeah.
A lot of it came from 1930s blues music, especially those that originated from, let's say, Mississippi or Louisiana, the deep South. That's where that great blues music came from. And
Yeah.
this movie is a celebration of that, which is why the film's coda is probably one of the best things I think I've seen all decade, as that celebration, as that
Yeah.
liberation of that, as a celebration of
Yeah.
the good times, even despite the bad times that surrounded it. It's wonderful
Yeah.
filmmaking.
Yeah. But it's also about how that deep connection to music tethers to capitalism and assimilation, the struggles of passing. The film also has these incredible nuances as around Irish colonization,
Yeah.
around the deep ties of East Asians in the Delta. It's about the Bayou superstitions that
Yeah.
exist, how all of that fuses together to tell one seamless story. So, on a metaphorical level, there are all of these incredible, like layers of Americana, deep South Americana that has informed so much culturally over the last 100 years or so. And again, in the hands of anyone else, that might just be interesting but messy. But there's something about how Coogler takes all of those ideas, how he executes on those ideas here that blew me away. That clearly worked for a lot of other people given
Yeah.
the discourse out there. So,
Yeah.
as much as it is a celebration of music, and I do agree that it is that, but I think it's also this incredibly thoughtful and wonderfully provocative exploration of assimilation and Irish colonization, how those things are working congruently and in contrast to each other throughout the film. And that's
Yeah.
why having Jack O'Connell as your antagonist here is a brilliant decision. A brilliant decision.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because he is ultimately a character that empathizes with these other characters around him, but
He has an
that
emotional motivation.
he has an emotional motivation. And when, like given the history of America, particular the idea of like white America taking some of these things musically and making it their own, that is another element of this that Coogler is kind of tapping into.
Yeah.
But the congruent and contrast of like the Irish heritage and colonization, how that kind of, or not even kind of, how that very much taps into the Black Southern narrative, I think is brilliant. It's nothing short of brilliant.
There's a fusion there for sure, and I do respect Ryan Coogler for going out of his way to make Jack O'Connell a villain for sure, but not one that's fully I guess, devoid of sympathy. Like there's
Mm.
at least a
Hmm.
little bit of pity you can have for what his motivations are, and you kind of understand that. But he's still a very
Yeah.
despicable human being. You can have it both ways, and I think Jack O'Connell's performance is able to balance those things, and why he's so
Yeah.
effective there. I think in some ways, given what you're talking about, the movie kind of reminded me a little bit of, I mean, first off, it did remind me a little bit of Get Out, thematically speaking, but it also reminded me a little bit of, remember the movie The 40-Year-Old Version from 2020, which was a movie that was essentially all about the way white Americans respond to black art, and sometimes how that response might be not the most genuine response. Maybe there is a sense of envy or a sense of feeling that these people need to entertain us. And
Yeah.
I think this movie's kind of getting at that a little bit as
Hmm.
well. Get Out was very much about the idea that white Americans have become kind of envious of the gifts of black Americans, and they wanted
Yeah.
to take that from them.
There are
And that
parallels. There's no
there
doubt
are
about it.
definitely parallels. There are absolutely parallels. And I think this movie is using blues music and the essence of black music to kind of talk about similar things as well. And I was very much reminded of that, but it
Yeah.
does so in such a way that also weirdly includes vampires. We've rarely
Yeah.
talked about the vampires yet in this
Well,
conversation.
and yeah, and
Yeah.
that is the thing. Like
Yeah.
there are all of these incredible, like metaphorical or thematic ideas flowing underneath the film that I absolutely love because you're right. I mean, we could talk all day about the parallels between this film and Get Out. And
Hmm.
I personally, I was very much drawn to that here when you
Hmm.
see the connection to, Southern Bayou, Black American culture to the Irish colonization that you see in the film. And those
Hmm.
images of Jack O'Connell's character when he is trying to essentially steal or manipulate or exploit that musicianship that we see there at the
Yeah.
end when he's that's what
Yeah.
he
Well,
wants more than anything else. Like that's what he's
yeah.
trying to take.
For maybe affable reasons, but not the right execution, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And again, the history of that, like that subtext that is brought into the film, I just think is incredible. But to your point, it's just also a really fun vampire flick. Like there's so much on the
No,
surface that's just incredibly
it
diverting.
is